"You're my man now," said the Apache woman after the lonely rancher saved her from the wolves. The sun was just beginning to rise over the endless stretches of the southwest plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dry earth. On this vast, lonely land, a rancher moved through his property with a quiet rhythm, almost like the land and he were in perfect harmony. He was a man who had grown up here, learning from the ground, the animals, and the unforgiving sun. His hands were calloused from years of labor, and his face, weathered by wind and sun, held a calm determination. People in town whispered that he was a lonely man, but he didn't mind. The ranch had been his world for as long as he could remember. The ranch was far from any town, isolated by miles of dusty trails and rugged terrain. Life here was simple, but hard. The rancher woke early every day, long before the sun broke the horizon. His mornings began with checking the fences, making sure the cattle were safe, and inspecting the water sources. Then came the feeding and tending to the livestock, each task precise and essential. He moved through his chores with quiet efficiency, each action reflecting years of experience and care. This routine, though repetitive, was comforting. It kept him busy, it kept him grounded, and it kept loneliness at bay, though only just. Despite the rhythm of work, there was a certain emptiness that even the vast open skies couldn't fill. He had lived alone for so long that silence had become a companion. Nights were long, filled with the soft whispers of wind through the trees and the distant howls of coyotes. He had no one to share stories with, no one to celebrate small victories, no one to call family. Yet he was used to it. Solitude had shaped him into the man he was, strong, careful, and independent. Still, deep down, he sometimes wondered what life would feel like if there were someone beside him, someone who understood him in ways the land and animals never could. Life on the ranch wasn't without danger. Wild animals roamed freely, and the vast wilderness could be as cruel as it was beautiful. The rancher had heard stories from travelers and townsfolk about wolves roaming nearby, attacking livestock and even threatening anyone who dared wander too far from the safe trails. He had always kept a careful eye on the signs: broken branches, unusual tracks, distant growls at night. Wolves were cunning, patient hunters, and he respected their power. But he also knew that in this land one had to be ready for the unexpected, especially when alone. On this particular morning, as he checked the farthest corner of his property, something unusual caught his attention. There was movement among the trees, shadows shifting too quickly for the wind alone. At first he thought it was a deer or perhaps a coyote, but then he heard it, a sound that made his heart tighten. It was a human voice, filled with fear and panic. The rancher froze, listening carefully. The voice was calling out, broken and desperate, carrying through the quiet of the morning like a plea. His instincts immediately kicked in. Someone needed help, and he was the only one nearby. He moved cautiously toward the sound, his boots crunching softly against the dry earth. As he got closer, the cries became clearer. A woman was trapped, and from the direction of the sounds it was clear she was surrounded. The rancher's pulse quickened, not with fear for himself, but with concern for whoever was in danger. His mind raced, thinking of the best way to approach without causing further panic. He had faced wild animals before, and he knew that any sudden movements could make the situation worse. But he also knew that hesitation could be deadly. Breaking through the last line of trees, he finally saw her. She was alone, cornered by a pack of wolves that had encircled her, their eyes gleaming and teeth bared. Her clothes were torn, and her hair was messy, but her spirit was not broken. She tried to fend them off with a stick, swinging it with trembling hands, but it was clear she couldn't hold them back for long. The rancher's heart sank at the sight, but he knew he had to act. Without a second thought, he grabbed a sturdy branch and shouted loudly, making himself as big and intimidating as possible. The wolves paused, growling, sizing him up, but they didn't back down. The rancher's mind worked quickly. He remembered what his father had taught him about dealing with predators. Loud noises, fire, and quick movements could confuse and scare them. He picked up a rock and threw it near the wolves, startling them. Then he grabbed a piece of dry wood, struck it against a tree to make noise, and shouted again. Slowly, carefully, he advanced, his eyes never leaving the wolves or the woman. It was dangerous, but the rancher had never been one to back down when someone's life was at stake. Finally, after tense moments that felt like hours, the wolves retreated, disappearing into the woods with low growls. The woman collapsed to the ground, exhausted and shaking, but safe. The rancher ran to her side, kneeling down to check for injuries. "You're okay," he said softly, trying to reassure her, though she could barely hear him over her rapid breathing.
Her eyes met his, wide with fear and disbelief.
Gee. She didn't speak, but there was a look of gratitude that went beyond words. It was clear that she had thought she might not survive the encounter. The rancher helped her to her feet, steadying her as best he could. He could see cuts and bruises, evidence of the wolves' attack, but nothing life-threatening, thanks to his timely intervention.
"Can you walk?" he asked gently.
She nodded, still trembling. He guided her back toward the ranch, careful with each step. Breath. She stumbled a few times, and he supported her without complaint. In the quiet, between labored breaths and the distant calls of birds, a bond began to form. Not one of love yet, but of trust, born from shared survival. Great. As they approached the ranch, the woman finally spoke, her voice soft and wary. "Thank you," she whispered, almost to herself. The rancher nodded, offering a small smile. "You're safe now."
You don't have to worry.
There was something in her eyes, a recognition, a connection that went deeper than words. She had been alone in the wilderness, facing danger without any hope, and now she realized that this man, a stranger to her, had risked his life to save hers. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the rancher prepared a simple meal for them. The woman sat quietly, watching him move with quiet efficiency around the cabin. Psst. He didn't ask too many questions, respecting her space and her pace. Slowly, she began to share small details about herself, where she had come from, how she had ended up in the wilderness, and why she had been so far from any town. Her story was filled with hardship, courage, and resilience. The rancher listened, nodding, understanding more with each word. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something new. Responsibility not just for his land and animals, but for another human being. It was a strange feeling, one that brought both warmth and uncertainty. He was used to solitude, used to the rhythm of life on the ranch, used to facing dangers alone. But now, for the first time, he realized that he was not just a protector of land or livestock, but a protector of life. The night grew colder, and the wind howled softly outside, rattling the windows and doors. Yet inside the cabin there was a quiet sense of safety, a fragile peace that neither of them had felt in a long time. They didn't speak much as they sat together, letting the silence fill the space between them. It was a comfortable silence, one that suggested understanding without words. The woman, though still wary, felt a spark of trust in the rancher's presence. And the rancher, though cautious, felt a flicker of hope. Hope that perhaps, for the first time in a long time, he was not truly alone. As the night deepened and stars scattered across the sky, the rancher went outside for a moment, looking over his land. The moonlight glinted on the fences, the cattle, and the wide-open plains. He felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if the events of the day had shifted something fundamental in his life. The woman's safety, the trust they had begun to build, and the quiet companionship forming in the cabin all hinted at a new chapter, one that neither of them had expected but both would soon embrace. Little did they know, this encounter was only the beginning. The wolves, the wilderness, and the lonely stretches of land were not finished testing them yet. But, for this first night, they could rest knowing that courage, quick thinking, and a willingness to step forward had saved a life. And perhaps had begun to change 2 lives forever. Morning after the rescue dawned slowly with a soft golden light spilling over the hills and plains. The rancher had stayed awake most of the night, keeping a quiet watch over the cabin where the Apache woman slept fitfully. Her breathing was uneven, punctuated by occasional twitches, evidence of the fear and pain she had endured the day before. He had never seen anyone so brave yet so vulnerable at the same time. His mind kept replaying the scene in the woods, the snarling wolves, the woman's frightened eyes, and the sharp surge of adrenaline that had driven him to act without hesitation. He had saved her life, yes, but now the responsibility weighed heavily on him. She was injured, alone, and far from home. The thought that she might be in danger again haunted him. When she finally stirred, groaning softly as she opened her eyes, the rancher was there, sitting quietly on the edge of a chair beside her bedroll. "Good morning," he said gently, brave. "How do you feel?" She blinked at him, her dark eyes wary yet searching. Breaths. "I think I'm okay," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the night's ordeal. He nodded, offering a small smile. "You're safe here. That's what matters." She didn't reply, only stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to measure whether his words could be trusted. Patient. Slowly, she pushed herself into a sitting position, wincing as a sharp pain ran through her arm. The rancher immediately moved closer. "Careful," he cautioned. "Don't move too quickly." He had prepared a small tray of food for her. Bread, cheese, and water. Simple, but enough to give her some strength. She ate slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for each piece. Desperate, he watched her carefully, noting the bruises on her arms and the scratch marks along her legs. "I'll need to clean those," he said softly. She flinched at first, then nodded, her trust growing ever so slightly. He fetched a basin of warm water and gently cleaned her wounds, applying a makeshift bandage with cloth he had on hand. She winced once, but there was no panic, only an acceptance of the care he offered. Once the wounds were tended to, he began to talk. Cautiously, "You must have been very scared out there. I can't imagine what it was like facing them alone." She didn't respond at first, staring into the fire he had lit in the small stove. I was," she admitted finally. Her voice was low, but there was strength in it. A quiet defiance. "But I didn't want to give up." He nodded, respecting her courage. "You're strong. Braver than most people I've met."
She looked up at him then, a faint hint of a smile touching her lips. For the first time since he had found her, she seemed at ease.
The day passed slowly, the silence between them filled with small acts of cooperation. The rancher brought fresh water from the nearby well while she rested on the bedroll, regaining some energy. When she tried to rise, he gently stopped her. "Not yet." "You need strength," he said kindly. She obeyed, watching him move with the ease of a man who had known this land all his life. He checked the fences, repaired broken posts, and even coaxed a stubborn cow back into the pen. she observed quietly, her eyes following each movement. Narration. There was a rhythm to his work, a confidence that made her feel safer despite the unfamiliar surroundings. By late afternoon, she insisted on standing, despite his protests.
I can walk, she said firmly, though her voice was soft. He nodded, helping her steady herself.
Step by careful step, they moved outside. The ranch was quiet except for the occasional calls of birds and the rustling of wind through the grass. She looked around, taking in the vast openness. It's beautiful here, she said softly. Psst. He glanced at her, surprised at the calm in her voice.
It can be.
But it's also dangerous, he replied. You can't be careless. She nodded, her gaze thoughtful. As she grew stronger, the rancher decided it was time to teach her a few survival skills, just in case they encountered danger again. Rasp. He showed her how to spot tracks in the dirt, how to recognize the sound of approaching animals, and how to use a stick or rock to defend herself if necessary. She listened intently, absorbing every word. Though she had survived on her own before, she understood that this man had knowledge and experience that could keep her alive. There was a silent respect forming between them, built on necessity and courage, that neither of them fully acknowledged yet.
Evening came, and the sky turned shades of deep red and purple. They worked together to secure the cattle and repair a small section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm.
Her hands were still bruised, but she moved with determination, matching his pace. The rancher couldn't help but notice how quickly she adapted to the work, how her movements were confident despite the pain. By the time they finished, the air was cool, and the smell of dry grass mixed with the scent of evening dew. She looked at him and nodded, a simple gesture of gratitude and acknowledgement. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, casting a warm glow across their faces. They ate a modest dinner together, beans, bread, and fresh water, and the conversation grew easier. Breaths. She told him fragments of her story, how she had been traveling to visit relatives, how she had wandered too far from the safe paths, and how the wolves had found her. She spoke cautiously, not revealing everything, but enough for him to understand the peril she had faced. He shared small details of his life too, not to boast, but to give her a glimpse of his world. It was a quiet intimacy, built on trust and necessity, rather than words of romance. As night fell, the wind howled softly outside, rattling the wooden walls of the cabin. The woman shivered slightly, and the rancher offered her a blanket. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be another long day." She nodded, pulling the blanket tightly around her shoulders. Desk. He watched her for a moment, feeling a strange sense of protectiveness that he hadn't felt in years. This was more than duty. It was connection, the kind that comes when two people survive something life-threatening together. Sleep came slowly, both of them awake at intervals, listening for signs of danger. The rancher made sure the doors were secure and the fire burned steadily. She drifted in and out of sleep, occasionally muttering or turning to shift away from imaginary threats. He didn't disturb her, simply observing, ensuring her safety. This night was another reminder that the wilderness was unpredictable, but so was human connection. He had saved her once, but now he felt the responsibility deeply. Not just to keep her alive, but to keep her safe and to honor the trust she had placed in him. The next morning she woke feeling stronger. She stretched, testing her muscles, and found them sore but functional. The rancher had already begun his morning chores, feeding cattle and checking the fences. Desk. When she joined him outside, he handed her a bucket for the water, and she moved with a steadier gait than before. They worked side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes exchanging brief words of instruction or encouragement. Each task completed together, no matter how small, seemed to build a bond between them, a connection forged not in comfort, but in shared labor and survival. By midday, she had regained enough strength to walk further than the cabin's immediate surroundings. The rancher guided her to a small clearing near the edge of the property. There, he taught her how to identify safe plants, how to recognize animal tracks, and how to notice the subtle signs of danger in the wilderness. She absorbed the lessons quickly, asking questions and demonstrating a natural intelligence and intuition. It became clear that she wasn't just surviving, she was learning, adapting, and preparing herself to be more than a passive recipient of help. The rancher respected her for it, silently acknowledging her courage and resilience. Even as the sun began its descent toward the horizon again, the two remained outside, working together. A gentle breeze carried the scent of earth and grass, and the sound of birds returning to their nests filled the air. They paused occasionally, catching their breath, and the woman looked at him with a quiet smile. It was a small, fleeting expression, but it spoke volumes of gratitude, trust, and a slowly growing sense of comfort. The rancher returned her smile, feeling an unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with the sun or the fire. It was a feeling of connection, of knowing that he had made a difference in someone's life, and that difference mattered deeply. As night fell once more, they returned to the cabin. The woman tended to minor scrapes while the rancher prepared their meager dinner. Conversation flowed more freely now, with laughter and shared stories breaking the tension of the previous day. She spoke of her childhood, of family traditions, and of the land she had grown up on. He listened, contributing small anecdotes of his own life on the ranch, and the exchange became a bridge between two worlds, hers of heritage and survival, his of solitude and labor. By the time they settled down for the night, both were exhausted, but at peace. The Apache woman, once terrified and alone, now felt a flicker of safety and trust. The rancher, once isolated and accustomed to solitude, felt a stirring of responsibility and care that was unfamiliar yet deeply satisfying. Outside, the wind continued its gentle howl, and the distant calls of nocturnal animals reminded them of the wilderness beyond their cabin walls. But inside there was warmth, safety, and the quiet beginnings of a bond that neither of them could yet define fully. That night, as sleep finally took them, the rancher knew one thing clearly. He would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Not just because it was the right thing, but because her survival had become entwined with his own sense of purpose. And the woman, though weary and still cautious, understood that in this vast, lonely land, she had found an unexpected protector, someone who had risked everything to save her, and whose presence now brought a sense of hope she hadn't known she could feel. The days that followed were quieter than the first two. Yet each one brought a subtle shift in the lives of the rancher and the Apache woman. The harsh wilderness still surrounded them, and the ranch remained a vast, lonely stretch of land. But within the cabin and among the fences, something new was forming. A fragile trust, slowly growing stronger with each passing day. The woman had regained much of her strength, for her injuries had healed enough for her to move freely and even help with small tasks on the ranch. At first, she had been hesitant to touch anything, afraid she might make mistakes or disrupt the careful order the rancher had built. But he encouraged her gently, showing patience whenever she faltered. "It's okay," he would say with a reassuring smile. "Bah, you'll get the hang of it. Just take your time." Slowly, she began to find a rhythm, helping feed the animals, collect water, and repair broken fences. Each act, small though it was, gave her a sense of purpose and independence, while also proving to the rancher that she could be more than just someone he needed to protect. Evenings became their time for quiet conversation. After the animals were tended to and the fences secured, they would sit by the fire in the cabin, sipping water or sharing small, simple meals. The woman spoke more freely now, telling stories of her childhood, of the land she had grown up on, and of the challenges she had faced before wandering into danger. Her voice carried pride in her heritage and respect for her family's traditions, yet also a deep resilience born from surviving hardships alone. The rancher listened intently, intrigued by her courage and her perspective. He shared small stories of his own life, tales of solitude and labor on the ranch, moments of struggle and small victories. Each story, though simple, created a bridge between their worlds, one built on understanding rather than assumption. Brace. One afternoon, as the sun glimmered brightly over the plains, the rancher decided to take her further into the land to teach her more about survival. "You need to know the signs," he said as he handed her a walking stick. "Tracks, scents, sounds. The wilderness speaks if you listen." She nodded eagerly, her dark eyes bright with curiosity and determination. They walked side by side, carefully examining the soil and grass. He showed her how to identify different animal tracks, how to notice broken branches and disturbed earth, and how to predict the movement of animals nearby.
She learned quickly, absorbing each lesson with sharp attention and a quiet confidence.
During these excursions, the woman revealed a natural intelligence and instinct for survival that impressed the rancher. She wasn't just learning from him. She was observing, analyzing, and sometimes anticipating his next move. He found himself admiring her focus, resilience, and adaptability. She had been alone in the wilderness before, yet now, under his guidance, she was learning to navigate it with new tools and insights. The rancher realized that this partnership, born of necessity, was transforming into something deeper. He cared for her beyond the act of saving her life. He respected her as an equal, as someone strong and capable. Despite their growing trust, there were moments of tension. She was still cautious, wary of being entirely vulnerable. He was still learning to navigate his own emotions, struggling to reconcile years of solitude with the budding connection he felt toward her. They sometimes exchanged glances filled with unspoken questions. How much should we trust each other? What happens if danger strikes again? But these moments were fleeting, replaced quickly by action, laughter, or the quiet rhythm of shared work. One day, while repairing a section of the fence that had been damaged by a recent windstorm, the woman asked a question that surprised him. "Do you ever feel lonely here?" she asked softly, her voice almost hesitant. He paused, leaning on his tool, and considered her question. "I have," he admitted finally, "for a long time. But I've gotten used to it. This land, it's been my companion." She looked at him thoughtfully. "But you must miss people." "Family? Friends?" He nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in her words. "Sometimes, but I've also learned that loneliness has its own lessons. It teaches you patience, focus, grasp, and the value of the few connections you do have." She nodded, understanding more than he expected, and a quiet silence settled between them, comfortable rather than awkward. Evenings continued to bring warmth and companionship. The rancher would often sit near the fire while the woman carefully tended to small household chores, repairing cloth or preparing meals. They spoke less of danger now and more of daily life, sharing small dreams and reflections. She told him about the traditions of her people, the songs, the stories, and the respect for nature that had been passed down through generations. He shared moments of his life on the ranch, tales of storms weathered, cattle lost and found, and quiet victories in the face of isolation. These stories, simple as they were, built layers of understanding between them, each layer strengthening the trust they had begun to form. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the rancher and the woman sat outside, looking over the ranch together. The wind was gentle, rustling the tall grass, and the distant mountains were tinged with golden light. "Des, you've changed the way I see this land," she said softly, her gaze distant. He looked at her, curious. "How so?" Before, it felt empty, lonely. Now it feels like it can hold more than just survival. It feels alive, she explained. He was struck by her insight, realizing that he too felt a subtle change, a sense that life could be more than routine and labor. That connection could exist even in this vast, isolated place. Their work together became seamless. She learned how to handle the cattle, how to secure gates, and how to anticipate the needs of the land. He watched her grow more confident, proud of her progress, and yet aware that their bond was becoming more than teacher and student, more than rescuer and rescued. It was something unspoken but undeniable, a connection built on shared experience, respect, and the quiet knowledge that each had saved the other in some way. He had saved her life, and she had saved him from the emptiness of complete isolation. One afternoon, while checking traps for small animals to supplement their food, they encountered a herd of deer near the edge of the property. The woman froze, instinctively quiet, eyes wide with awe and caution. The rancher smiled at her reaction.
"Careful," he whispered. "Don't startle them." They watched the deer together, sharing the moment in silence.
The simple experience became a shared memory, a gentle reminder of the beauty and dangers of the land they now navigated together. Moments like these strengthened the trust and companionship forming between them. As the week passed, the woman began to feel more comfortable with the rancher. She laughed more freely, joked quietly, and even offered suggestions during daily tasks. He, in turn, allowed himself to relax in her presence, appreciating the warmth and light she brought into the otherwise harsh and lonely environment. Her connection was subtle, like the first light of dawn, slow, steady, and quietly transformative. By the time the sun sank below the horizon one evening, the cabin felt less like a temporary shelter and more like a home. The woman moved with confidence around the space, arranging small things, preparing a simple meal, and tending to minor chores. The rancher watched her, feeling a surge of respect and something deeper he hadn't felt in years. She had come to him frightened and alone, and now she was an equal, a partner in daily life, someone who made the ranch feel complete in a way he hadn't thought possible. That night, as they sat near the fire sharing a meal, the woman finally spoke words that had lingered between them unspoken for days. I feel safe here," she said softly. Her eyes met his, steady and sincere. "With you?" he nodded, understanding the depth of her statement. "You're safe?" he replied simply, his voice calm but firm. There was a pause, and then she added almost shyly, I think I trust you." He felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet affirmation that their connection was no longer fragile, but growing stronger with each shared experience. The night was calm, the stars shining brilliantly over the wide open plains. The wind whispered through the trees, and distant animals called softly in the darkness. Inside the cabin, a gentle warmth filled the space, a contrast to the cold wilderness beyond. The rancher and the woman sat quietly, letting the silence speak for them. It was a comfortable silence, one that hinted at trust, companionship, and the beginnings of something deeper. As sleep approached, the rancher reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. He had saved a life, yes, but he had also discovered a connection that had been missing for years. The woman, once fearful and alone, had found safety, trust, and a subtle sense of belonging. Together they had faced danger, worked the land, and begun to understand one another in ways words alone could not convey. Though the wilderness remained unpredictable, and the ranch continued to be a place of solitude and hard work, the bond between them was now undeniable. It was a bond built on courage, trust, and the quiet realization that two people could find connection even in the most isolated corners of the world. And as the fire crackled and the night deepened, both the rancher and the Apache woman knew that this was only the beginning. that their lives, intertwined by chance and courage, would continue to grow together in ways neither had imagined. Breaks turned into weeks, and the rancher and the Apache woman had settled into a new rhythm. The ranch no longer felt empty. The land still stretched endlessly around them, wild and untamed. But within the fences, there was now life, laughter, and quiet companionship. Every sunrise brought them back to work, tending the cattle, repairing fences, and maintaining the ranch. But the chores, once solitary and lonely, were now shared. The woman had become confident in the daily tasks. She could handle the cattle, carry water, and even mend torn blankets or torn saddles with surprising skill. She had learned quickly. But more than that, she had learned to anticipate the rancher's movements, to understand the rhythm of the land, and to act with independence. He noticed the change in her every day. It wasn't just that she was stronger or more capable. It was that she now belonged here as much as he did. One afternoon, as they worked together repairing a section of the fence near a small stream, a conversation arose that neither had spoken aloud before. The woman paused, leaning on her hands, and looked at him with an intensity that made him stop mid-swing.
You know, she said softly, I never thought I would find a place like this.
Or someone like you.
He raised an eyebrow, curious. What do you mean?
She looked down at her hands, then back at him.
I mean, someone who cares.
Brash. Someone who doesn't just see me as weak or in danger, but as important, as capable. Brasp. As worth trusting. The rancher's chest tightened slightly. He had spent so long alone that he wasn't used to hearing words like these directed at him.
You are worth trusting, he said simply, his voice steady but sincere. You've proven that every day. She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and admiration in her eyes.
For the first time, the weight of their survival had shifted into something lighter, something unspoken but deeply felt. They cared for each other, not just out of necessity, but because of who they were together. Evenings became their sanctuary. After the work was done and the cattle secured, they would sit by the fire, sharing meals, laughter, and small stories about their lives before the wilderness. She told him about her family, the Apache traditions, the songs and ceremonies, and the values that had been passed down through generations. He shared tales of his own solitude, of storms he had survived, and the lessons he had learned, living alone on this harsh land. These stories, simple as they were, became threads weaving them closer together, building understanding, respect, and something more tender beneath it all. One night, after a long day of work, the woman hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking," she said softly. He looked up from his work, curious.
About what? About you? And me? And this place? She admitted, her voice almost hesitant, as if testing the ground.
He stayed silent, letting her continue. "I came here alone, scared, thinking I might never see anyone again. But now, I feel like I belong here. With you, Miss." She paused, searching his face. I want to stay. I want to be here with you! The rancher felt a surge of emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He had saved her life, yes, but now she was offering him something far more valuable: trust, companionship, and love. He stepped closer, resting a hand gently on hers. "You don't have to ask," he said softly. "You're already part of this place, part of my life. You always have been, since the moment I found you." Her eyes shone with gratitude and a quiet joy that warmed the cabin more than the fire ever could. The next days were filled with small celebrations of their new life together. They worked side by side, laughed over minor mistakes, and shared quiet moments watching the sun rise or set over the plains. The woman had begun teaching the ranchers small things about her heritage. A song here, a story there, or even the subtle ways her people understood and respected the land. He listened and learned, fascinated by her knowledge and grateful for the perspective she brought to his world. One afternoon, while fixing a broken gate, the rancher noticed a subtle change in her demeanor. She moved with confidence and grace, but her eyes kept finding his, as if silently communicating something she hadn't yet spoken. Finally, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, she stepped closer, her hands brushing against his. I think I love this life," she said softly. "And I think I love you." He was silent for a moment, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't something he had expected to hear so soon, but it wasn't a surprise either. He had felt it himself, slowly, over days and weeks of shared labor, survival, and quiet companionship. "I care for you too," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "More than I realized I could." She smiled, relief and happiness mixing in her expression, and for the first time in a long while they felt the full weight of connection and belonging. Life on the ranch continued, but the sense of partnership had transformed every task. Feeding the cattle, mending fences, or collecting water was no longer solitary labor but acts shared between two people who cared deeply for each other. Even the small chores, cooking, repairing, or cleaning, became moments of joy and connection. The Apache woman's presence brought life and energy to the ranch, and the rancher found himself looking forward to every moment they spent together. Challenges still arose, of course. A sudden storm damaged a section of the fence, and a herd of cattle wandered close to danger. Wolves were spotted in the distance one night, though they stayed far enough away. Each obstacle reminded them that the land was unforgiving, yet facing these challenges together strengthened their bond. They learned to rely on one another, to anticipate each other's needs, and to communicate without words in critical moments. Trust had become second nature between them. The community from the nearby town eventually noticed the woman's presence. Some were curious, others skeptical, but the rancher's reputation as a man of integrity and courage softened judgment. When neighbors came by for supplies or advice, they saw not just a solitary rancher, but a partnership, a team that had faced danger and adversity together. The woman, once wary of strangers, began interacting cautiously with visitors, demonstrating the courage and confidence she had developed since the day the rancher had saved her from the wolves. One night, as they watched the stars from the porch of the cabin, the woman spoke again, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "I know we have challenges ahead," she said, "but I want to face them with you. I want this life. With you. Here. Together." The rancher looked at her, feeling a sense of peace and certainty he hadn't known in years. "Then we face them together," he replied, his hand finding hers. "Whatever comes, we face it together." From that day on, their bond grew deeper and stronger. The ranch was no longer just a place of work and solitude. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a symbol of survival and love.
Every morning brought new opportunities to care for one another and for the land they cherished.
Every evening offered moments of reflection, gratitude, and shared joy. The Apache woman had found safety and belonging, and the rancher had found companionship, trust, and love he had long thought impossible in his lonely life. They faced the wilderness together, met challenges side by side, and learned from each other's strengths. The rancher's experience and knowledge of the land complemented the woman's resilience and wisdom. Together they became not just survivors, but partners in life, each one making the other stronger. The bond that had begun in fear and necessity had evolved into love, respect, and shared purpose. In the quiet of one late evening, after the fire had burned down to glowing embers and the wind whispered through the tall grass outside, the woman turned to him with a certainty that only came from experience and trust. "You're my man now," she said softly, but with strength and conviction. He felt the words settle deep in his heart, filling the emptiness that had haunted him for years. He smiled, taking her hand in his, and whispered, "And you're my woman." The land stretched endlessly around them, wild and untamed, but within the fences and the cabin there was peace, safety, and love. The wolves and the dangers of the wilderness remained outside, but together they had created a life that was stronger than fear, isolation, or uncertainty. They had built a home, not just in the land, but in each other's hearts. From that moment forward, every day was a celebration of survival, partnership, and love. The Apache woman, once lost and alone in the wilderness, had found a protector, a companion, and a home. The rancher, once solitary and isolated, had found trust, connection, and a purpose beyond the land and animals he had tended for years. Together they faced each sunrise with courage, each task with cooperation, and each evening with gratitude and joy. And as the stars shone brightly over the plains night after night, they knew, without question, that this life, these days, and this love were theirs to hold, protect, and cherish forever.